My salutations to all of you. Welcome back to the Gita Odyssey live sessions. Today is our session 10, and we are in our first course, the first step into. In the last 9 sessions, we covered two important topics, the section 1 and 2 and 3 of the book. Essentially, we covered the foundations required for a meaningful study, focusing on why should I study Bhagavad Gita, what is Bhagavad Gita, how should I study Bhagavad Gita, and a brief history of the Bhagavad Gita. And in the second section, we covered the Gita Dhyanam, 9 meditative verses usually chanted before the study of the Bhagavad Gita, especially in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. These meditative verses, they themselves are a prayer. They are good for meditation, and also it is extremely useful in connecting a practitioner or a seeker to the message of the Bhagavad Gita. If you want to recap, you can always go back to our YouTube channel or Spotify and listen to the lectures. And if you want these materials, you can message us. We will be gladly providing these materials also with you. So after completing these 2 sessions, these 2 topics, now we are getting into the actual Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita. This chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita is known as Arjuna Vishada Yoga. We are going to talk about the name and all the details and why Vishada. Vishada typically is considered as a problem. How it is treated as a yoga in this chapter, and the significance of this chapter, everything we are going to discuss. But today, what we are going to focus today is setting the stage. We wanted to understand the context and the message, because the Bhagavad Gita is communicating a message to us, a message that is relevant to our day-to-day living, a message that is intended to transform us. But it is presented in a context related to an ancient battle that happened in ancient India. It is presented in a context of a civil war happened in ancient India probably 5,000 years back. So usually there would be a confusion. Why the problems of Arjuna? Why the problems of a warrior? Why the problems that of 5,000 years back? How it is relevant to me? How I can take that message and apply that in my day-to-day challenges. The challenges as a software engineer, the challenges as the leader of an organization, the challenges of a homemaker, the challenges of a mother, the challenges within relationship, challenges within family. How this message can help me to face the situation in front of me. How this teaching can be helpful to grow as a complete person. So this is the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita. But usually people get confused with the context and gives more importance to the context and lose the message. So today's session, what we are going to do is to talk about the context and talk about the difference between the message and the context. It is important to understand the Mahabharata background, but please understand that the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita do not have any dependency on the Mahabharata context. The same teaching can be taken and applicable in a context which is suited for the modern audience. For example, we can take a context of a professional working in Wall Street, perplexed by the situations of the challenges offered by his day-to-day life and how this teaching can be applied to his context. So that's why our classes are not intended for storytelling, but today is the only class we are going to give the story, because usually the Mahabharata context is misunderstood. So just to give you that background of Mahabharata context, this is not for us to stick to the Mahabharata context, just to relate with the context in which the Gita is presented. And once we cover the story of the Mahabharata, go forward, we are not going to talk about the story of the Mahabharata. We are only going to talk about the applicability of the Gita's message in our context. This is an introduction. So with that, let's get started. So first, let's start with a quote. See, within the wombs of our deepest struggle lies the impetus to birthing our greatest transformations. In the story of Mahabharata, the hero of that battle, Arjuna, had to go through the greatest struggle of his life. Our struggles are nothing compared to the struggle Arjuna had to go through. So from that struggle, what happened? He got the life transforming message, and because of him, all of us got that. So that's a quote. So let's start with the first topic of today's discussion. So setting the stage. What exactly is the Mahabharata context? So I'm going to talk about that story. So today's whole session is about the story and how it is related to the context of the Gita. So before we get into the Mahabharata story, let's try to understand the difference between a context and a message. Any important message we communicate, usually that message will be communicated within the context, within a context. For example, we all know that the famous discovery of the law of gravitation. Usually this story or this message is presented with the context of an apple falling down. Sir Isaac Newton witnessed or he has seen an apple falling down, and he thought, why the apple is not going up? Why it is falling down? Because of that context, in that context, he started thinking, and as a result, what happened? The message came out. So what is a message? The fundamental idea or lesson or information is to be conveyed. In this story of the law of gravitation, what exactly we wanted to convey is the law of gravitation. If you put an object down, what is going to happen? It will be accelerated 9.8 meter per second. That is the law we wanted to convey. And this law, this situation can be presented in different contexts to different people. If it is presented in a scientific conference, a scientific language can be used to convey that message. And if it is presented to a teenage student, it will be a different context. You can take a different settings. And if it is presented to a small kid, you can present it through the examples of a toy or anything like that. But what exactly is the foundational idea, fundamental idea, or a lesson or information that is conveyed? That is the message. And the same message can be presented through the different characters and settings and background suited for the audience to be communicated. So now there is an important question. What is more important? Is the context is more important or the message is more important? Obviously, the message is important. For example, if I start sitting and thinking, when exactly Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravity? Is that 16th century or 17th century or 14th century? Is that going to change any facts related to the law of gravity? Absolutely not. Is it a red apple or a green apple? Is that happened in England or Ireland? It doesn't matter. So most of the times, people get caught into the context and forget the message. So let's keep this in mind in the study of the Bhagavad Gita also, because the Bhagavad Gita is usually presented in the context of Mahabharata. So one more point related to the interplay between the context and messages, because the context is used to enhance the relatability of the message. For example, if we present a particular message, as I said, if it is presented to a small children, you have to make sure that the context is appropriately changed. So that is very important. And the purpose of the context is it will facilitate the understanding. It will facilitate the comprehension of the message. This is very important. So the whole idea, what you see in this picture is the same message can be presented in different context. And if we pay too much attention to the context, what happens? The message that is conveyed in a particular context, it may not be relatable to the other context if you pay too much attention to the context. So, the Gita's timeless wisdom. What is the timeless wisdom of the Gita? It is a body of knowledge intended to create the inner harmony in any individual and lead us to the path of the highest possibilities of life. So think about that. One is the purpose of the Gita is to create inner harmony, the contentment, the happiness, and the efficiency of action, ability to move forward smoothly, and set a direction towards the highest possibilities of his life. This is the message Gita is communicating. And this message is presented in the context of an ancient battlefield. The same message can be presented in the context of a modern corporate boardroom or any personal challenges in the context. So each context, if you present this in the Mahabharata context, it provides a unique lens through which the central message is explored. When the Bhagavad Gita is presented, it is presented in the context of an ancient battlefield and to convey the message. What happened? The same message can be presented in the modern context also. So if you pay too much attention to the context, you will lose the message. And the greatness of the sage Vyasa or Maharshi Vyasa is he embedded the Gita within the context of an epic war. Because that was the style of ancient India. Because they used to take a historic incident and through that historic incident, they used to convey a message. So what happens? So this Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita is placed because Mahabharata is a larger canvas through which this message can be conveyed. And there was a reason for communicating this message in the context of the battlefield. Usually, till then, we are going to see this at the end of this session also. Usually, a message, the spiritual teachings are presented not in the context of a battlefield. The conventional belief was that a spiritual message needs to be communicated in a calm, serene environment, like in the mountains of the valleys of Himalayas, in a very calm, meditative environment. So a lot of people think that these spiritual teachings are suitable only for people of that contemplative mindset, all the spiritual seekers, and this is useless for the people who engages with the day-to-day challenges of the life. Maharshi Vyasa wanted to change that idea, that wrong idea. So he cleverly put the message of the Bhagavad Gita in the context of Mahabharata, in the most dynamic field of life, in a most practical, challenging environment, and clearly showed that this message can be applicable to all walks of life. This is the introduction we wanted to cover. Let me pause here. Avanti, you wanted to add any thought on this? Otherwise, we'll go to the Mahabharata context after your comments.
Is that it's very, very important to even understand the story. And like Rajesh was saying, any context will give a deeper meaning to the message. For example, when we talk to children or when we talk to adults about the greatest goal of human life is self-realization, and everything else is just a means to that end. And now when we have to convey that same message to maybe teenagers or to children, we'll give a classic example as to a little child is offered a chocolate by one hand and a check worth $100,000 in the other hand. What is the child going to choose? The child is going to choose the chocolate because it has no value for the $100,000 because it doesn't know what it is. So this is how we explain to teenagers or to the youth how in the context of self-realization, we are not aware what self-realization can give us because we are so used to and attuned to the mundane. So for every message, there will be a context. And I think the greatest context, like Rajeshji rightly said, to give a message as deliberate as the Bhagavad Gita, a civil war that too, not between two different kingdoms, but within the same family, which comes down to within our own bodies, within our own minds, within our own intellect, is given most dramatically, most beautifully, and most animatedly to give the message of this eternal fight between good and evil, and how you have to actually stand above good and evil and ultimately self realize. So pay attention to the story, enjoy the story, and then get into the message and stick with the message for the rest of the study of the Bhagavad.
Thank you, Avanti. So let's deep dive into the Mahabharata story now. This is very interesting because Mahabharata is the largest canvas that demonstrated the human experience and dharma. We talked about Mahabharata in our Gita Dhyanam also when we discussed salutations to Maharshi Vyasa. The first and foremost, there is nothing in world literature. I'm talking with most authority and humility. There is nothing in the world literature which can be even compared to Mahabharata. Please understand that. Over 85,000 shlokas. The nearest second book is Ramayana, which is 24,000 shlokas. You can imagine the difference. Just to understand the depth and the breadth of Mahabharata, the third and fourth largest epics in the world, which is Iliad and Odyssey. If you combine these two Odyssey, the size of Mahabharata is 4 times compared to the size of Iliad and Odyssey of the great Homer put together. This is the greatness of Mahabharata. It is like one of the largest and most comprehensive depiction of the human characters. You can find almost any human character you can imagine in that large canvas of Mahabharata. And this Mahabharata is a beautiful work of Maharshi Vyasa. And the greatness of Vyasa, why he wrote Mahabharata, even after compiling the Veda, is to communicate the message of the Veda through various characters. If you really think about the Vedas, what exactly is the root on which the greatest scriptures of the Sanatana Dharma stand? It is said that Vedo Khilo Dharma Moolam. The root of the Veda is Dharma. Dharma means doing what needs to be done at all situations. And Mahabharata is an elaboration of this topic. It shows how when dharma is compromised, how people forced to compromise dharma. And when dharma is compromised, what is going to happen? And what is the benefit of following dharma? And what is the definition of the dharma? And probably the best definition of the dharma comes from Mahabharata. It tells Atmana Pratikulani Paresham Na Samajare. Because Vyasa said, yeah, the dharma is complicated. To understand dharma, you need to make a lot of study. But the basic rules of dharma is very simple. Don't do anything to others which you don't want from others. Please listen to this. This is there in almost every scriptures of the world. Usually this quote is attributed to Bible, but people don't understand that. Yes, it is there in Bible, but it is there much earlier than Bible in Mahabharata. So, Atmana Pratikulani Paresham Na Samajare. So, Mahabharata is a depiction of dharma. It is dharma in action, because doing what is right. And the Mahabharata shows the need of the context of the Bhagavad Gita through the storyline of that Mahabharata. So the rest of this session, we will try to understand that storyline of Mahabharata, because Mahabharata has hundreds of thousands of narratives. We are not going to go through that thread. We are only going to talk about that thread which is leading to the context of the Bhagavad Gita. So let's continue. So now what happens? So Mahabharata, the legacy of the Mahabharata starts from an ancient dynasty of ancient India known as Kuru dynasty. I'm not trying to bring back dynasty politics here or not supporting dynasty politics or anything like that here. In ancient times, we know that there were kingdom, and that kingdom has to follow certain lineage. So here you will see some revolutionary findings in that ancient Kuru dynasty. So the Mahabharata mainly talk about the Kuru Vamsha, the Kuru dynasty. And the reason for Vyasa to describe the story of this Kuru Vamsha is to demonstrate dharma, because this is going to give the background of for the Gita students. So just a little bit of historical context. The origins of this Kuru Vamsha can be traced back to King Yayati. There was an ancient king in India. What happened to him was he had a premature aging from a curse. So mind you, when we talk about these epics, you see a lot of these type of mythological stories also added to that. So usually what happens is epic, the definition of the epic means itihasa, thus it happened. So they take a historical incident and they enhance that with certain stories and everything to convey the message. So you don't have to take everything in the epic as literal, but definitely some historical validity is there for the epic. So what happened to this King Yayati was he became premature aging because of a curse. And what happened was his son Puru, actually he did a sacrifice, because if the king goes down, that is going to affect the entire country. So the health and the well-being of the king was extremely important to run the country. So his son Puru has sacrificed his youth and given his youth to Yayati. So don't ask me like, how can you transfer the youth? These are stories to demonstrate certain messages. So the idea is to ability of people you to think outside of themselves and see a larger context. That is dharma, right? The definition of the dharma means I feel I feel to do in certain way, but there are a certain higher things I need to do. So in apart from my feeling what is to do, I do what needs to be done. What needs to be done takes more precedence over what I feel to do. So that is exactly what this the Puru has done. And that is the value shown by the different kings in that lineage. And after some time, this King Ayati gave the youth back to Puru, and he took the reins from King Ayati and continued this tradition. And down the line in that lineage, there was a king called Kuru, known for his virtues and practice of dharma, doing what needs to be done. More than the family, meaning the like his likes and dislikes, he used to follow what is right for the country and the community. And because of his noble rule, the whole kingdom came to known as Kuru Vamsha. So you might be heard of these terms. This usually comes in the Mahabharata a lot. Kuru Vamsha. So if you read the story of Rama, it is Reku Vamsha. Like that, the story of the Mahabharata stays around this Kuru Vamsha. Both Kauravas and Pandavas and all the people are part of this Kuru Vamsha. And in this Kuru Vamsha, down the line, there was a king called Bharata. Bharata, you might be knowing the famous Shakuntalam story. So in that lineage, there was a king called Dushyanta, and Dushyanta and Shakuntala got married, and they had a king called Bharata. And he has set a new standard in dharma. And because of he ruled the India or the ancient India, our country India came to known as Bharatam. In his honor, the name Bharat or the Bharatam came to India because it is ruled by this noble king who has set a new standard for the dharma. So you can see the image on the slide. These images are taken from the ancient, the serial Mahabharata, which came in late 80s, early 90s, which is nostalgic to a lot of people. So if you can see, even that serial, the first episode starts with this King Bharata. What is that made King Bharata very unique? He had 16 children as in his family. But what he found was none of these children were capable of becoming the king. So he took a historic decision in the country, and he said, "Go forward. By birth, nobody is eligible for succession." He said a merit-based succession over the birthright. This is what made King Bharata very unique. Remember, his love and care, everything was for his children, but he found that none of them were fit for ruling the country, because ruling the country is such a big responsibility, and he didn't want the country to go to an incapable hand. So he put rule, and he put a rule: go forward. In this lineage, the successor will be taken based on merit rather than birthright. This is a key point. This is the height of dharma that can be implemented by a particular king. Now, this standard set by Bharata continued for a long time, and every time the successor was taken because of the merit. And usually the king's sons are very good. If they are good, definitely they will be taken. But that doesn't mean that it is not going to make them ineligible or anything like that. And this continued. And in that lineage, there was another king called King Shantanu. I'm not going to, meaning he married to Ganga, and in that marriage, he got a great son called Devavrata, later came to known as Bhishma. And this Devavrata was an extraordinary person. He has all the qualities. But what happened was, during his life, this king Shantanu fall in love with a lady called Satyavati, a fisherwoman known as Satyavati. There is nothing wrong in being fisherwoman. That's not the point. But he fell in love with a lady. And what happened was, he wanted to marry this lady. He proposed, but this Satyavati's father said, "I will allow this marriage, the king to marry this girl, only if the king can give a promise that the son of Satyavati will be the successor of the king Shantanu." And Shantanu cannot give that the promise, because he knew that Devavrata is already eligible person, and he is extremely good. So he didn't give that promise. He came back, and he went into a very sad state. And seeing the worry of his father, Devavrata, his son, he found out the reason for the sadness of his father was because of this his love with Satyavati. So what Bhishma did was, or Devavrata did was, he went to this fisherman and said, "Please marry this lady to my father." And the father of the Satyavati said, "Yes, it can be done only if you promise." At that time, he said that, "I will not be the successor of the kingdom." So, and then this father said, "That is good. I know that you won't claim any right, but what about your children? They think that, okay, they have a legitimate right, and if they claim, that will be a risk in the family." So hearing that, Devavrata said, "Yes, I cannot control my children, but I have a control to decide whether I am going to have children or not. So I am going to stay as a brahmachari through the rest of my life." This promise was a big. It is always praised by a lot of people as one of the greatest sacrifice made by any son on behalf of his family. And because of this promise given, he earned the name called Bhishma, the one who did the terrible oath. But Vyasa is communicating a different message. We all think that, okay, he had a lot of love for his family. But what Bhishma did without knowing was he violated dharma. What was the dharma? Per dharma, a child has to be eligible for him to become the king. And here, Bhishma promised to make a child as the king, even the child was not born. This was a clear violation of the dharma, and here started the decline of the lineage. So Vyasa brilliantly narrates this. Usually people think this Bhishma as a greatest person. Yes, he definitely is a good person, but what happened? His undetermined, meaning he compromised dharma when out of the love for his father. And he did a sacrifice by compromising dharma. This planted the seeds for the future conflict in the whole dynasty. And this decision, driven by the love and loyalty, and he did what he felt good more than what is the dharma said by the king Bharata. So this is where the strain on dharma started. And then what happened? The Satyavati got married to Shantanu, and they had two children, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. And Bhishma actually he promised he will protect the country. Whoever sit in the throne of the Hastinapura, he said, I will see my father and protect it. That is the second promise Bhishma gave without knowing the consequence. So the tragedy happened. These Chitrangada and Vichitravirya died earlier without any successor. So what happened? Bhishma cannot take the kingdom. So the whole country became orphaned. So at that point of time, Satyavati invokes a practice called Niyoga at that point of time. So they invite a sage, and from that sage, the queens will be conceived, and that person, if they are good, taken as the next successor. So in that process, Satyavati called sage Vyasa, and they had three children like Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. So these are the three children that happened in the dynasty. And Dhritarashtra was blind by birth, and Pandu had some pale color, some skin diseases, and Vidura was a scholar. This was the three children. So then, if you go with convention, usually the elder son is the successor of the kingdom. But here also that eligibility came. Who can rule the country effectively should be made as the king. So here what happened was Dhritarashtra was blind. So without somebody's help, he cannot rule the country. So Pandu was more efficient and effective. So everybody determined that Pandu would be the king of Hastinapura. So Pandu was made the king. And Pandu married to Madri and Kunti, two people, and Dhritarashtra was married to Gandhari, and even though her brother Shakuni was not very happy. And in Mahabharata you can see the Gandharam belonging to the Afghanistan, the modern Kandahar, that is from where the Gandhari came in, and Kunti also, meaning all these historical places are there. And then what happened was Pandu was ruling the country, like the dharma was prevailing. He was an efficient ruler, but what happened? Again, the tragedy struck. This Pandu had a curse from a sage called Kindama, and later, meaning he said that he because of that curse, he retired from the kingdom and went to forest. And the promise was he cannot have any children directly. But Mother Kunti had some boons from certain devatas, and because of that divine intervention, the Pandavas were born. Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva. These are the mythological aspects of the story. And in the meantime, the Kauravas or the Dhritarashtra and Gandhari had 101 children known as Kauravas. So naturally, when Pandu retired to the forest, Dhritarashtra was made as the temporary king till the next lineage comes up. Now, after some time, a tragedy happened, and the Pandu passes away. At that point of time, the sons of the Pandu, which is Pandavas, were brought back to Hastinapura. So in that palace, both Kauravas and Pandavas started, meaning they both were there. Naturally, there was a fight for succession. There was some problem. So now, who should be the next successor? Again, go back to the eligibility. Who was the king of Hastinapura? Pandu. Dhritarashtra is only a representative because he was not eligible to become the king. So, per rules, the son of Pandu, if he is eligible, remember eligible, then he should be made the king. So, Yudhishthira, the son of Pandu, should was the most eligible person because he was the complete follower of Dharma and he was a righteous person, he was a noble person, and everybody in the country and outside unanimously determined that Yudhishthira he should be the king, meaning the king. So, because of that pressure, Yudhishthira was made as the king. Naturally, his cousins, Duryodhana, and influenced by his uncle Shakuni, they didn't like it, and because of that, they made a conspiracy. They actually created a vacation home and burned that house, thinking that and thought that the Pandavas died. But because of Vidura's intervention, the Pandavas escaped, and the whole country thought that the Pandavas died. So, since the Yudhishthira is no more, Duryodhana was made as the king. So, that created another problem. So, what happens? That when Yudhishthira came back later, technically there were two princes. These two princes, how do they rule? This was a big challenge. Again, a test of dharma. So all the elders sat together. Since we made both, meaning Yudhishthira at one time, and later thinking that Yudhishthira passed away and made Duryodhana as the king, so both Duryodhana and Yudhishthira were the kings. So they what they did was they divided the country into two. One is called Hastinapura and the other one is called Indraprastha. Indraprastha is the modern Delhi. So Pandavas happily accepted that proposal and they built a kingdom in Indraprastha and started ruling that, and that became very prosperous. Again, what happened? Duryodhana, his cousin, was not satisfied the kingdom he received called Hastinapura, and he started playing some tricks. So they invited Yudhishthira and the Pandavas for a game of dice, and because of the cheating, they lost and they had to go in 14 years to the forest. This is the loss and exile of the Pandavas. Again, Yudhishthira should not have paid the game of dice. He violated the dharma, and as a result, he got suffered. So, as per the rule, the Pandavas spent 14 years in forest, and when they came back, they asked for their legitimate kingdom, which is Indraprastha. Duryodhana said, "Nothing doing. I will not give. I will not even give you a space which, even a small piece of land, I will not give. Not even a handful of soil, I will give." Naturally, there was a demand for a dharma. This is the context how the war got emerged. So Arjuna, Nakula, Sakadeva, and Yudhishthira, all the Pandavas, they were ready for this battle, this historic battle of Mahabharata. So what happened? All the diplomacy failed. Even Lord Krishna went for a diplomatic mission and that got completely failed. See, this is the beauty of Mahabharata. Usually, if Bhagavan takes up a mission, or even in the modern movies, if meaning in some of these movies they won't show if the hero get failed, but in Vyasa, the beauty of the Vyasa is that he showed that even Krishna's mission got completely failed. There was no other option other than a war, and that is known as Dharma Yuddha. So the definition of Dharma Yuddha is war is the last resort for anything, right? Nobody wants to do the war, but there are certain situations where if you don't engage in a war, that is more dangerous, that will have more after effects than doing the war. A classic example, if you really look at the Second World War, if America, Britain, and all these countries, if they haven't not engaged in the war, what would have happened? The whole world would have been under the tyranny of this Nazi rule. So that at such situation, if there is no other option, that is the time the war is preferred. And here it was such a situation. If they had not acted, the entire country was gone to adharma, and that would have put this into disaster. This Duryodhana, who is the elder person of or the king of the other side, there is a famous verse Duryodhana tells, I know what is to be done, what is right, but I cannot do it. And I know what should not be done. I cannot stop doing it. This is what happened. So if you this is what led the context of the war. And if you really look at the size of the army, the Kauravas or the Duryodhanas had a larger army, and Pandavas, and also they had big, mighty warriors like Bhishma, Drona, and Karna. So Bhishma, again, because of the promise he has given, what was his promise? The promise was whoever sitting in the throne of Hastinapura, he will protect. So cleverly, when they divided the kingdom, they kept the Hastinapura with Duryodhana, and Bhishma was bound by the word to protect that country. And Drona was an employee of Hastinapura, so he didn't have any choice. And all these people, great warriors, were on the Kairava side. And Pandavas had only seven Akshauhini. It's a number which is used to indicate the size of an army. That is fewer, but they had Dharma with them. And the greatest strength of the Pandava they had Krishna with them. Because when Krishna is there, what happens? He will lead through the Dharma. So what happened? This battlefield of Kurukshetra, it's a test of morality, dharma beyond the battle. This is the scene. These are all stories that happened. This is the place Maharshi Vyasa chose to put the message of the Gita. So this is the first topic, which is the context of the background of Mahabharata, which is led to the birth of Gita. Avanti, you want to add anything on the story?
Yeah, just a few things I'll iterate or reiterate rather over here. So, like we said in the last class also, one thing you have to remember that the immensity and the vastness of Mahabharata lies in the fact that nothing has happened or will happen or is happening in the world that is not mentioned in the Mahabharata. Now, even when Rajeshji was explaining Yayati's peculiar condition of aging very fast, I don't know how many of you all have seen the movie The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I don't know whether they picked it up from the Mahabharata and Yayati's case, but even that movie is about a child, a baby, who is born aging. And then also of the next one, Puru giving his youth to Yayati. It's not out of the box and out of context, because today's stem cells from another human being, which we are using to reinvigorate ourselves, using even in places like Singapore and all that, collagen treatments, all of that to reinstate youth in human beings is very, very common. So one thing you have to understand, whether you want to call Mahabharata myth, mythology, whatever, you will be amazed when you look very closely at life that whatever is mentioned there, however out of context it might have seemed even a few centuries or few years ago, is all actually happening now. So remember that always, that whatever is not there in the Mahabharata is not there in the world, and whatever is there in the world has been mentioned in the Mahabharata. This whole, I think what we need to focus, what's of relevance from this entire story to us right now, is this eligibility issue. Now, for the longest time, especially a country like Bharat has been shaken up and really put down with this word called nepotism. And it's quite sad actually, because the way our dynasty started, our entire, the Bharat Rajya started, was completely against this word nepotism, where only a person born of a certain family or a certain status could inherit that status and take it forward, eligible or not. And that's why we see a country like Bharat in the most worst scenarios. That's not even a word, most worst, but it is really that bad because of this whole concept of nepotism. And like Rajeshji said, it was going beautifully under the rule of Bharata and all, until Bhishma made that very terrible vow and decided to flout that highest dharma, where eligibility will always be given to the one who is deserving and not by the merit of birth or sex or gender or any of that. So he flouted that actually. So that's something that we need to bear in mind always. And that's where it started spiraling down. And even today, it is spiraling down. So, what is the lesson that we need to learn from this? Is even with our children, we have to be able to call a spade. Just because we have all the opportunities to give them, blindfoldedly giving them everything on a golden platter, and not seeing their eligibility or grooming them into an eligible state can cause disasters. I mean, really liquidate this to your own personal life. Best parenting comes when we are able to see eligibility and be able to provide. And if our children are not eligible, to try and make them eligible or give them fields that will groom them into being eligible into whatever they can do well. So that's one thing that we need to remember. Don't put these stories out there. They're not in our context. What is, we don't have any kingdoms to rule. No, we have our little worlds that we have to perpetuate through our own progeny. So these lessons will be very handy when we look at our own lives and our own family dynamics. Then one more thing I wanted to highlight here was, because this question will come up later, I'm 100% sure, is that didn't Satyavati flout the whole dharma thing by calling some other person Vyasa? No, because actually you have to remember, to perpetuate the Kuru dynasty, she didn't flout any dharma because Vyasa was her son as well. Vyasa was her son that she conceived and had with sage Parashar. So he was not out of context at all. Just as Chitraganda and Vichitravirya were her sons, Vyasa was also her son, and she was the rightful queen of Hastinapur. So she didn't flout, because that question comes up a lot before we start chapter 1. Very often, Mahabharata is very badly condemned as a war-mongering philosophy. And this is one more thing that needs to be reiterated again. It is not war-mongering. After every single avenue was tried and tested by the Pandavas, of course, but by Lord Krishna himself to make peace with the Kauravas. Every single, I mean, the final dialogue, if you see, when Krishna goes and he asks, like, just give them 5 pieces of, give them their kingdom. No. Give them 5 pieces of land, they can live happily. Land, just land. No. Give them one place with one house with 5 rooms and a room for their mother. No. Okay, give them one hut. No. Then Duryodhana says, even as much as an eye of the needle, that amount of land also I will not give. It's different in different commentaries. But it came down to that, where Duryodhana said, absolutely not. Not even the space of the eye of a needle will I give. I'm not going to give them anything. They're not worth anything. After such negotiations and after such tries at peace treaties, was the Mahabharata war decided upon to fight, and it was fought. So it was not the first thing, oh, we want our kingdom, so we take it. Another thing, what happens with, especially with our Bharatiya mentality, I feel, is that the amount of invasions that have happened, we have got into that whole subservient nature of just giving in without a fight. And as phenomenal and as winning as Mahatma Gandhiji's philosophy of ahimsa was, it was very wrongly understood. It is still today very wrongly understood by us, that somebody slaps us on the one cheek and we give another cheek. Yes, we do, but not beyond a point. So that whole concept again comes down to Krishna's peace treaty, where he tried and nothing was possible, and so they had to go to war. So that's another thing that we need to understand. And finally, just before we get into chapter 1, just so that this question never arises, is to, why was Krishna Arjuna's charioteer and not Duryodhana's? There also, it wasn't picked by Krishna. Neither was there a role of chits over there, how we usually do when we are stuck for a decision, we put 2 chits and we pick. Even that was not done. Krishna very honestly, earnestly asked both these entities, Arjuna and Duryodhana, What would you like? And just to go into that little story, we'll give that story so that this is very, very clear that this was also not a choice of Krishna, it was a choice of the people who were offered it. So, the night or sometime before the war, both Duryodhana and Arjuna go to Krishna to get his help. Obviously, this was going to be a momentous war, and they needed all the help they could, and definitely of Krishna, because he was the sanest out of the entire congregation there, and at the center of all the peace treaties and the talks and the decision of war and stuff. So Krishna was sleeping, and listen to these words carefully. Arjuna humbly sat at his feet waiting for him to wake up, while Arjuna haughtily went and stood by his head waiting for him to wake up. Now, as soon as Krishna opened his eyes, obviously, when you're lying down in a lying position and you open your eyes, you'll see what's in front of you rather than what's standing behind you. So his eyes fell on Arjuna first. And then he realized Duryodhana was up there, and he's like, what do you all want? And they said, we've come for some help. So Krishna said, of course, I will definitely help. And because I saw Arjuna first, I give him the first choice of what would he want from me. There's two things that you can choose. One is either my entire battalion with all my ammunition, all my arms, and all of that, or on the you can take all of that, or secondly, you can choose me, but I will come unarmed. I will not have my army with me. I will not even be protected myself, and I will not even pick up one single arm in my hand. And Duryodhana starts sweating. I'm dramatizing it because you have to see how just where your focus is can determine life or death for any individual. Duryodhana starts perspiring and saying, oh my God, Arjuna has asked, he's definitely going to take all the kingdom, and what a great army Krishna has, and it's going to be such an asset. He starts thinking this. Whereas Arjuna, without even batting his eyelid, says, Krishna, I want you. Nihatta, unarmed, and just as you are. And Duryodhana beams inside and grabs whatever else Krishna has to offer, which is the army, the ammunitions, the arms, and all of that. And that one choice is where the Bhagavad Gita begins. That Duryodhana had all of that, and Arjuna had just Krishna unarmed as his charioteer. And now when we go into the chapter and we see the significance of what that charioteer actually is and what Arjuna has in reality chosen, the whole story will unfold very, very beautifully. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Avanti. So that completes the first topic, which is we try to understood the larger context of Mahabharata, as Avanti beautifully explained. This meaning the context is always relevant, but we need to relate that message to our own life. The key point is that if I sit and think why Bhishma did that way, yes, we can learn from the act of Bhishma and apply that to our life. So this is not to judge Bhishma, this is not to judge Shantanu, this is not to judge Duryodhana or anything like that. It is for us to understand what is happening, because we are also fighting, meaning waging a battle. We also have to face Arjuna's situation, which we are going to talk next week. What exactly is the fundamental problem by zooming into the Bhagavad Gita? So we will first try to understand what was Arjuna's problem, and then we will try to relate that with our problem, because there is an Arjuna in each one of us. There lies an Arjuna in each one of us. And there is a Kurukshetra battle in each and every one of our life. So this is the point. How do we face life's situation? And how can we face that situation in the most effective and efficient manner? So that is going to come. So as I said, today we discussed a lot of stories. This is the only time we are going to discuss this story. This is just to give you the background. But our focus is not on these stories. You can always go back and read Mahabharata. It's a brilliant story. Thousands of stories are there and they are very interesting. But our focus is going to be on the actual Bhagavad Gita. So next week, we'll zoom into the Kurukshetra battle a little bit. And immediately after that, we will be getting into the first chapter.